everyone to the Latino Heritage Month 2022 speaker series. We're so excited to have you all here today. I am Swelling and I am going to be your host today. Before we begin, let me tell you about the Center for Global Partnership and Learning, partnership with Pepperdine University, Graduate School of Education and Psychology. The Center for Global Partnerships and Learning offers a wide range of programs geared towards the advancement of student scholarship. We serve as a gateway for students and alumni to be able to develop their skills, elevate their voices, and develop their research acumen. Our focus is on the following areas: Scholarship Without Borders Journal, collaborative research opportunities, certificates, workshops and seminars, publication and conference presentation support. Through our programs and opportunities, we strive to enhance the student experience and ensure that our students can have access and support in furthering their academic scholarly activity. Now, let me introduce our speaker. Dr. Gallardo is one of our professors in the psychology department, and he is a licensed clinical psychologist. He maintains an independent consultation practice. Additionally, his areas of scholarship and research interest include understanding the psychotherapy process when working with ethnocultural communities, particularly Latinx communities, and understanding the process by which individuals develop cultural awareness and humility. Dr. Gallardo has published referred journal articles, books, and book chapters in the areas of multicultural psychology, Latinx psychology, ethics and evidence-based practices, cultural humility, and racial color limited perspectives. He is currently a series editor for Cognella Academic Press Advances in Culture, Race, and Ethnicity book series. Dr. Gallardo also regularly discusses issues relevant to understanding how we can develop more humane relationships with one another in his Cultural Humility podcast. He's currently Director of Research and Evaluation of the Multi-Ethnic Collaborative of Community Agencies, MECCA or MECA, a nonprofit organization dedicated to serving monolingual communities of color. Dr. Gallardo served as 6-year governor-appointed licensed member of the California Board of Psychology and is the founding president of the California Latinx Psychological Association. He is also a past president of the California Psychological Association and the past chair of the Committee on Ethnic Minority Affairs of the American Psychology Association. He is a currently serving 5-year appointment on the Clergy Misconduct Oversight Board for Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Where he is also one of the Anti-Racist Task Education Committee members. Dr. Gallardo is a fellow of the American Psychological Association. Please welcome Dr. Gallardo with his talk entitled Faith, Family, and Everything Else, a Journey in Unlearning.
Thank you, Phil. And that was a great introduction. And every time I hear that introduction read, I want to turn my screen off or exit stage left while it's being read before I come back on. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, I appreciate the invitation to be here this evening and to spend a little bit of time. I mean, this is an important time for for me and for our families, and I think for our communities. Latinx Heritage Month is an important time, and so I was asked to just they sort of kind of said, like, talk about your process, kind of what you think might be important. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of touch on a few things. I'm going to touch on just what I hope we take away from, just reflect on during this month and kind of think about, and also talk a little bit about my own process and why I think that's important, as I think about the work that I do, both here at the university, but also in, outside the university as well, which to me, there's a lot of alignment there, and I'll come back to that in just a few minutes. But I wanted to start with this slide here, from W.E.B. Du Bois. And as I think about Latinx Heritage Month, I want to sort of talk about both some of the challenges, but also some of the strengths and resources and positives as well. But I can't help but think of this, as I think about what's happening now in the United States and just globally. And W.E. Du Bois said, if there's anybody in this land who thoroughly believes that the meek shall inherit the earth, they have not often let their presence be known. And I think that's profound in many ways, and so relevant today, because many folks in my communities are being used as political pawns as we speak, and as are many other communities as well. And so I'm hoping that as we think about this particular month, that we think about how we can participate in trying to really advocate for, be allies with, and really support Latinx communities, I think, in ways that are much needed. A lot of times I get asked to do a lot of talking to a lot of different people all over the place, and I get asked a lot of times about just the previous administration and all the things that happened and all the things that have happened over the last 5 or 6 years or so. And I always tell folks, and I'll come back to this later, it's in my title, around just faith and my glass being always half full and having hope and optimism. And I always say that, there's a lot of stuff that's happening and has been happening that has not always been so great and so positive. But I also have really encountered and continue to work with so many people who maybe weren't invested in the same way that they are now, in doing and trying to make the world a better space, relationships better with each other, and just to sort of treat people in more humane ways. And so I think there's a lot of positives that have also come out of some of the great tragedies and challenges and dehumanization that we've experienced, and in many ways continue to experience. And so I remain hopeful and optimistic that will continue to happen. And as we think about how we can move forward and support community members during this month and beyond, hopefully. When I think about Latinx Heritage Month, a lot of things come up for me, but I want to take you through a brief activity. And when I say brief, I mean very brief, because I'm not going to give you a whole lot of time to look at these photos, because if I give you too much time to look at the photos, you will overthink, it's way too much, actually. And so I don't want to. I'm going to give you just a few minutes, a few seconds actually, on each photo. I'm going to show you 10 slides of 10 families. And all I'd like for you to do is just identify for me what you believe are the cultural backgrounds of these family members. Okay, 10 slides, 10 families, not going to give you a whole lot of time. So just write number 1 through 10 somewhere, or on a piece of paper, on your computer, wherever you are, and let's see what we come up with. All right, here's family number 1. Okay. Just identify what you think are the cultural backgrounds of these particular families. That's family number 1. All right. There's family number 2. Okay. Family number 3. Family number 4. Family number 5. Family number 6. Family number 7. Okay. Family number 8. Family number 9. And family number 10. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing just for a second, and I'm just going to, actually, no, I'm not going to stop sharing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my chat here and move it over. And then if you could, if folks feel comfortable just writing in the chat what maybe how you identified some of these families. So this is the family number 10. Anyone feel comfortable just typing in how you maybe culturally identified this family? I'm not seeing anybody come up. Maybe there's Afro-Latino. Okay. All right. Through skin tone and hair. Okay. Okay. All right. How about family number 8? Dominican. Okay. This is Dominican, Indian, Dominican. Okay. All right. How about family number 8? Look a mix. Okay. Anybody else? Salvadorian, Latin America. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I'll take that. How about family number 4? Number 4. Asian. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. And then one last one, Asian American. Okay. Asian diaspora to Latin America. Okay, cool. Dr. Miyake Trap is on to something. Okay, all right. How about number 1? This is family number 1. This will be the last one we do. Anybody want to take a Mexican American? All right. Okay. Aisha, thank you. Anybody else? Native Latin American Mexican. Okay. All right, cool. All right, good. Okay, cool. All 10 of these families are Mexican families culturally. All 10 are Mexican families. Sometimes that kind of surprises people and other times it doesn't, but all 10 of these families are Mexican families culturally, all of them, all 10 of them. And so why is that important? Why does that matter? Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think Audre Lorde said it best when she said there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And so, I think a lot of times when we think about Latinx communities, sometimes we tend to just sort of, I think, generalize and clump a lot of us together, particularly I think geographically where we live. And here in Southern California in particular, Mexican and Mexican American communities are certainly the largest communities of Latin American descent here in Southern California. And so I think a lot of times people think everyone's just Mexican or Mexican American, and geographically wherever you go that may change depending on the community. But we are very diverse, as you know, and so I think as I think about reflecting on Latinx Heritage Month, I'm hoping that we embrace the diversity in our communities and find ways to celebrate that diversity in ways that we certainly don't always do oftentimes. And so I think I I'd like for us to expand our sort of notion of culture to a certain degree. A lot of times culture is made synonymous with race and ethnicity only. And that's problematic. I think it's really simplistic. It's narrow. It narrowly defines communities, and I think it also fails to include issues of intersectionality oftentimes, which are certainly, I think, very indicative of what people's lives look like and what all that means for them in essence. And so we are diverse. So how can we embrace the diversity during this month and beyond in many ways? And that, to me, that's important. And how do we become advocates and allies and whatnot during this time? I have this slide here that is really a reflection of different aspects of who I am as an individual. And I entitled it "What I See Could Be Me." And I have that there for a lot of reasons. I learned a long time ago that I think the more that we see one another in each other, the less harm we will do to each other, and the more we'll take care of each other. And so I like to sort of start with that foundation in some ways. And then I also have learned in many ways that every encounter is an encounter with knowledge, no matter who it's with or where it happens or under what circumstances. And so all these different identities, sociocultural identities you see on the screen are just, who I am in many ways. And so even as I talk about Latinx Heritage Month, it's coming from all these different experiences and identities. So we've had other speakers that have come before me. There's more that will come after, and we're all going to talk about it in different ways and think about it in different ways. There'll certainly be some overlap and also some divergence in many ways. We had the good fortune of having Dr. Howard Stevenson come and speak to the psychology division during our anti-racist day a couple years ago or so. And when he was speaking, he said something as he was talking about his life and growing up in the home that he did, and what he said, like it like just sort of like resonated through every ounce and inch and bone in my body. And he said that he grew up in a house where prayer and protest existed side by side simultaneously. And when he said that, it just sort of hit me like, in a new way where, I always sort of talked about those things in some ways. But when he said it really came to life in some ways. And that was my home. That was my house. That was my upbringing. Prayer and protest have always coexisted together. So if you see on the screen Catholicism, you see Mexican American, you see social justice, all these different identities are so profoundly impactful as to who I am. But this idea of prayer and protest continuing to really be, I think, reflective of my experiences in many ways, and the work that I do and how I approach the work that I do it really drives that. Before I came to Pepperdine, I was at UCI for about 6 years. And when I came up in the field of psychology, there was really this sort of division between psychology and religion and spirituality. It's like the two just didn't intersect, and there was this separation. And I think coming to Pepperdine was really profound in many ways, because it really, the idea of having religious and spiritual foundations and also being a trained psychologist were always so, always coexisted for me. But there was sort of a divide, a divisiveness and division between those things in the field. And so when I came to Pepperdine, it was the first time that I was sort of in some ways kind of encouraged, and even in some ways strongly encouraged, to think about how those two things came together. And that has been, I think, a really a profound, I think, experience for me in thinking about, how I've kind of solidified those two aspects of my identities in many ways in the work that I do, and in all the both professional, personal, etc. So I have all these things on here because it really signifies where I am at this moment in time. I always tell people that I talk about a lot of the issues around anti-racism, cross-cultural relationships, all these kinds of things around cultural humility. And I always tell people that I am working as hard as the next person to make sure I don't offend and unintentionally oppress somebody else. And so while I have spent a lot of time studying and talking about these issues and thinking about these issues, I still am working, and I still stumble and fall and still need to get back up. And you know, people are gracious with me and extend a hand and let me get back up. But I certainly have unintentionally oppressed others at times, and continue to find myself on the oppressive end of things at times. I've never been more privileged at this moment in time in my life than I ever than ever before. All that matters. All that matters. And so when I think about, you know, the things that influence my work and the things that I've done here at Pepperdine, including the establishment of Aliento, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes, that matters. And then I think about my mother. This is my mother, and this was me on her lap when I was just born very young. And it's hard for me to think about myself as a human being, but also as a man, as a Latino male, without thinking about my mother and without thinking about the women in my life who have influenced how I see the world, how I think about the world, how I make sense of it. And so my mother and my father, who I'll show you in just a minute, you know, are you know, I think really resonated and really brought us up in a strong Mexican-American Catholic household in many ways. And there was a lot of flexibility and room to explore and to think about the things that matter to us, even within those frameworks, if you will. And so it is impossible for me to think about who I am as a human being today without talking and referencing my mother. And then my father, who became a deacon in the Catholic Church after he retired many years ago. And this was him doing his first homily at the church where I grew up and was raised. I can tell the girl behind him is thoroughly invested and interested in what he's saying, based on the look on her face. I'm kidding. That was just a quick shot we took, but I always look at that picture and I make fun of my dad and laugh. I said, "Dad, you weren't keeping her very interested. What happened?" And so this was his first homily. This was the first homily he did after he was ordained as a deacon. And my father, in many ways, really, I think, implemented and instituted a real strong sense of pride in being Mexican American. I always say my mother was really, I think, about the humanistic experience of just being good people to everyone. And my father was too, but my father was much more around the strength and the inherent and what we inherited as Mexican Americans, both the positive and also some of the challenges. And then I think when he became a deacon, that, you know, became, I think, a whole nother set of dimensions and part of our lives and conversations. So those foundations have been, I think, very profound in my work and what I do today. Mark Twain said that the two most important days in your life are the day that you were born and the day you find out why. And when I became a father, that's when I found out why I existed in many ways. It was sort of a life-changing moment for me in my life. I always knew I wanted to be a father, but I don't think I knew exactly what that meant until it happened. And see, these are our two daughters. On the left is Citlali, and on the right is Yatsi. This is when they were younger. This was about 4 years ago or so. And you can tell that we're passing on the prayer and protest. And their shirts say, if he builds a wall, we'll grow up and tear it down. And the sign in the back talks about, you know, Black Lives Matter, immigrants and refugees are welcome, love wins, you know, women making choices for themselves and us respecting their bodies, and all this kind of stuff that we really implement and institute in our children's lives. And what I'll tell you is that it has also changed my work in many ways as well. This is them recently. The left was their first day of school back last month, second grade and kindergarten. And this is my spouse, my life partner, who, when I think about the women who influence me and who impact me and who shape how I see the world, she's definitely one of those individuals who has continued to both support me, challenge me. She's a strong Mexican-American woman, and also really help me grow in many ways. Fantastic partner, fantastic mother, in many ways. But what I think becoming parents did for us and for me is that I have continued to try to I've always been around bringing people together as we do this work, as we think about all these challenges facing our communities, particularly within Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the dehumanization that happens on a daily basis. I have always been about how do we do this differently? How do we bring people together? When we had children, I really started to think around, like, how can we teach our children about the realities of the world of growing up with Indigenous names, speaking Spanish, growing up in the world that they do, helping them understand the realities while also not perpetuating more of the same, while also not perpetuating more division and divisiveness, but more kindness, compassion, love, and how do we do that? And that's, I think, one of the greatest challenges for me and for us as parents, is how do we teach them about the realities and also teach them about that it's important that we try to do this differently as we move forward. We're in the year 2022, and some people have said that what we're seeing today is as bad as it was during the Civil War in some ways. And so as a parent who's raising two Mexican-American children, I think about those things all the time, and how we can make sure that we're really supporting them and also not perpetuating the exact things that we continue to see happening in the world, which is hate and divisiveness and divide and dehumanization that keeps happening over and over again. So that's to me my greatest challenge at this point, and also one of my greatest joys is being a father to them. And so when I have faith and family, those two things, my life starts and ends with those two things, and then everything else comes after, including Pepperdine. Pepperdine comes after those things. And so my faith starts at the day and ends the day, my children and my family, and then things follow from that along the way. And then I think about, as we talk about, colonization and decolonizing and deconstructing and doing things differently. I grew up with this sign, my father telling me stories about growing up and being raised in Texas, in South Texas, and having these signs and not being able to go places. My father's experiences more than my mother's in many ways. And so I have this exact sign in my office at Pepperdine. And sometimes when people come into my office, they'll ask me, dude, what's with the sign? And I tell people, it's a reminder to me that when I talk to people and they tell me that what I'm talking about is no longer in existence or doesn't happen anymore, or that I'm sort of, maybe I'm making everything about these issues, I go back to this sign and it reminds me that I'm not that far off, because that while the signs may not exist, there's indirect and covert messages and signs that continue to exist for many BIPOC communities. And so I think that in that way, the work continues, and the work is so important. And so when I think about colonization, for the process of colonization to occur, we have to create images and narratives to sustain the subjugation and justify the subjugation of other people. It had for it to make sense in some ways. And if you think about what's happening now, we are continuing to create images and narratives about communities. When we think about Latinx communities and immigrant communities, immigrants from Latin America, or children coming from other countries, because of the conditions that they live in many ways. The narratives that we create here in the United States, it's not just, we're not special. It happens in different ways all over the world and in different forms. But when we create those narratives in many ways, it becomes the justification for how we continue to engage in many ways with certain communities. And so it becomes the explanation for the colonial situation. And so it justifies those actions in many ways. What it has also done for us as Latinx communities is we have to understand that racism in the United States is rooted in anti-Black sentiments, anti-Black racism. And we as Latinx community members are not immune to that air that we're breathing and our own sense of anti-Black sentiments. And I think over the last few years or so, we became, in many ways, many of us have always known that was part of our process. But I think over the last few years, particularly as we were seeing these senseless deaths and murders of many Black African-American communities and Latinx communities and others, I think the conversation really began to shift around looking at ourselves and how we have been influenced by those legacies of colonization in many ways, where Alice Walker first defined colorism in her book as prejudicial or preferential treatment of same-race people based solely on their color. And so even if you look at research, Hunter in her book has done research around looking at Mexican Americans with light skin who in many ways earn more money, complete more years of education, live in more integrated neighborhoods, et cetera, than darker skinned Mexicans. That is me. That is me. So my privileges as a Latino male, as a Mexican American male, fits into a lot of this. And so I have been challenged over I've always been challenged in different ways, but I think over these last few years, I have been much more intentional about recognizing even my own limited perspectives and limited knowledge and limited awareness at times, and really thinking about how much, in many ways, we have so much work to do both within and outside our communities in many ways. When you look at social indicators in the United States, every social indicator we have in the United States privileges lighter skinned individuals over the long term. But that does not mean that those of us who have lighter skin, whether we're Latinx or not, should feel bad for who we are or guilty for that. But it's more like, what can we do to sort of, with those privileges that we have? And so I think about how we're talking about decolonization. Fanon reminds us that there's no way to return to a pristine pre-colonial time, so that the only way to change the stratification of post-colonial world is through decolonization. Oftentimes, most decolonial theories are focused on the decolonial process of those of us who've been colonized and liberation in some ways. But we also have to focus on sort of those outside of our communities. It cannot just be about the colonized, but it also has to be about many white-bodied individuals and community members also deconstructing their own cultures and ideologies as we do this, as we think about how to be more humane and humanistic in our work moving forward. And so Deloria reminds us as people who've been colonized that when we leave behind the culture shock, we will be masters of our own fate again and be able to determine for ourselves what kind of lives we will lead. And so when I think about the work of Aliento, I think about why we started Aliento was for those reasons. And I think about Maria Hinojosa, who's an award-winning journalist and has a show on NPR. And she said that my stories didn't appear. We were invisible. I was invisible from the media narrative. No one in the reporting that I saw looked like me and looked like my family. So I began to think about maybe somehow my life, my story was less valuable and less important. And so when I think about even our own education system, even at Pepperdine has been good to me, and I love Pepperdine, but Pepperdine is operating within a traditional system, and some would argue within a colonial traditional system of education and training. And so even in our goodwill intention, we are perpetuating at times some of the exact things that I think are creating those actions and behaviors that we're trying to diminish and decrease. And so Aliento was sort of this idea of how do we create a program that's going to, one, affirm and validate the experiences of Latinx community members from wherever they're coming, help students, whether they're Latinx or not, be better trained to meet the needs of unserved and underserved Latinx communities out in the real world, because we know from the literature and mental health and statistics and data that many Latinx communities are unserved and underserved. There's disparities to access, barriers to access to treatment and health and well-being. And so our Aliento program was the sort of the genesis of trying to begin to bridge the town and the gown, if you will, and really make our work here at the university more in sync with, and train students in a way that was more in sync with the needs of the communities that we're trying to train them to treat and to serve. And so the program really was founded, and also the curricula was developed from feedback from the community, from folks in the community, other professionals, etc. And so so that work has continued. We're almost we've been in existence for about a decade now. And we've graduated a lot of students who are doing this work and doing it well. And so I think we're trying to reflect and make the presence of diverse stories and experiences legitimate and valid within our education system, because sometimes I think our education system can invalidate those experiences at times. So why does all this matter? Well, I think about this Mexican proverb that says, they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. And I think about our strength and resilience within Latinx communities and all the things that we contribute to society. And I remember during the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion around people working out in the fields and all this other stuff, and heroes and sheroes in the medical professions and the medical fields. And I will tell you, I was as thankful as anybody else for all those first responders, people in hospital systems, and who were taking care of all the folks who were sick, including some of my family members. We lost family members during this time. And I also wish that we recognized all the folks in our communities who were continuing to sustain us by putting food on our table, by continuing to show up to work and work the fields, clean our spaces in many ways. At Pepperdine, I always remind folks, when you look at the places we occupy and how beautiful the landscape is and how beautiful our classrooms and our facilities are, it's like there's someone doing that for us. There's someone who's taking care of that for us. And many times it's Latinx individuals who are doing that work. And so how can we better appreciate those folks who are doing that work for us and recognize our resilience as community members? And so I think about this idea of Pope Francis saying that we need to build bridges, not walls. And so he said in the social and civil context as well, I appeal not to create walls, but to build bridges, to not respond to evil with evil, to defeat evil with good, and the offense with forgiveness. And so prayer and protest. I'm trying to teach our students this as much as possible. I'm not perfect, and I still stumble and fall and make mistakes, but I think the intention and the purpose of our program and the work that I do both here and outside the university and my family, I've always said I never want to be a public success and a private failure. And so the work that we do as human beings, as parents, as people in the world is really similar to what I do as a professional here at the university and beyond in many ways. And so I'm interested in how we bring folks together. I'm interested in our students, first of all, seeing the value in who they are affirming who they are as many of them, the majority of them being Latinx, and then also doing that for other community members when they go out and serve. So so some takeaways for me as I think about this work and my own process and journey and what I think about during this time. I think I certainly was not born culturally responsive. I think a lot of times we automatically ascribe some cultural knowledge and credibility to people just because of where they come from or how they identify or the color of their skin. And look, I think we certainly have had experiences, but I think we've also learned, it's been front and center, that it's not always about the color of our skin, but how conscious we are about the things that are happening around us. And so I think I'm working as much as the next person. The worst thing that we can do is believe everything people say about us, whether it's positive or negative. And so I think we have to remain grounded and sort of centered in that way while working within the systems and the processes and the work that we're trying to do, that sense of humility in our work. You can spend a lifetime building a reputation and seconds destroying one. And so I think how sort of fragile and vulnerable all the work that we're doing is, and how fortunate we are to be able to do what we're doing. To be here listening today is a privilege. To be at this space is a privilege. And so how can I not forget that and make sure I recognize that on a daily basis? And then the more I think I know, the more I realize how little I do know, actually, at the end of the day. I remember years ago, people would ask me like, well, you've sort of accomplished a lot, you've done. And I would just say, yeah, I try to work really hard and just try to do that. And then at one point I said this, and I had this epiphany, and I started thinking like, I have family members in my own family and communities that I work with, Latinx communities I work with, who work 10 times harder than I've ever worked before in my life. And their life changes very little. And so, it was that sort of reckoning of my own privilege in that process in many ways, and sort of understanding that in a different way and using that in some ways to do the work a little bit better and a little bit more consistent with folks. I've learned that rest is resistance. The colonial situation has, in somehow or another, inculcated in many BIPOC communities and many Latinx community members that we have to always be in action, moving, trying to sort of do what we need to do to sort of prove ourselves or prove that we're not, to prove that what we aren't in some ways. And I think the NAP ministry is a great resource. And she talks about that rest is resistance, rest is self-care, rest is important, and being able to set those limits to take care of ourselves in a way that many of our family members were not able to, including my parents, my grandparents, and having that privilege. So, and then I've learned that faith is not about expediency. It's about knowing that we will receive what we need when we need it. And so when I think about what's happening in the world right now, I think we're being poked and prodded as people. And yet something's going to manifest and show itself in some ways. And we're going to get what we need when we need it. And I have hope and faith that we're going to come out in a better space than where we started at the end of the day. It has not been easy. And I think about Muhammad Ali. My father was a Golden Gloves boxer, professional boxer in two divisions. And during that time, I mean, I'm thankful he didn't go even further. He said no because he wouldn't be able to earn a living way back when that was happening. And so boxing has always been a part of our lives as well. And I think about when Muhammad Ali was asked how he wanted to be remembered, he said his recipe for life was, I'd like for them to say that he took a few cups of love, he took 1 tablespoon of patience, 1 tablespoon of generosity, 1 pint of kindness, he took 1 quart of laughter, 1 piece of concern, and then he mixed willingness with happiness. He added lots of faith and he started up well. Then he spread it and expanded over a lifetime, and he served each and every deserving person he met. And I love that. I think it resonates so much. I don't know if that's what I'm doing, but I hope in some way or another I'm trying to do some of that in some way, in some form, to some people at some point in time. And so I like this as a sort of a life message in many ways. And then my my last slide, which I'm going to end with, is a Franciscan prayer that I hope that we sort of, it resonates with us as we think about not only this month, as we think about Latinx communities, but also all the communities who are in some ways not always responded to in the best way, and dehumanized and oppressed, and how we can serve them better, be allies more, be advocates more. And it says, may God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. And may God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness that to believe that you can make a difference in the world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all our children and to the poor and to many communities around the world. Amen. And so when I think about what's happening across the globe, when I think about what's happening on an international level to all communities, I'm not okay with any community being dehumanized and injustice happening anywhere, whatever the color of the skin is. And so how can we see ourselves as part of a larger family? And when I say could be me, I think when I do harm, when I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. When I treat myself well, I treat you well. And so this idea of always seeing myself and others, it's like if I'm doing harm to you, I'd like for us to think that we're also harming ourselves in the process. And I think that is so important. And what I will leave you with as I start to wrap up and finish within my time frame here. That's my last slide. As Suela mentioned, I have a podcast that I talk about these issues with people all the time. Feel free to reach out and email me. I mean, folks can find me at the university at any time, and happy to connect and be supportive. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it and not changing it for anybody. I'll stop there. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time today, and thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Dr. Gallardo, what a powerful and beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I would like to honor some of the question that is in the chat, but for our people in the audience, please feel free to raise your hand if you have other questions. I will go back to you in a moment. So we have 3 questions in the chat that I would like to honor. One of them is from Dr. Miyake Trape. What do you mean by could be me? I think you just answered that.
Yeah, I
don't
did.
know.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think I did. And good question. It's really more for me. It's around, there's this ancient Mayan greeting, in la quecha laquin, and the Mayans would greet each other, put their foreheads to each other, and they would say, I love and respect you. If I love and respect myself, I love and respect you. If I treat myself well, I'm gonna, treat you well. And so it's this idea of like, we are, when we look at our history in the United States, anytime we have worked together and come together, outcomes have always been better. And anytime we have divided and tried to, fragment and work against each other, we have never been successful. And so I think the more that we can come together, we have forgotten that we need one another for our survival. That's just the plain and simple fact. We have forgotten that we need each other for our survival. And that's everybody. That's not just folks of color. It's everybody. It's everybody. And I think the more we can find our way, we're sort of at a crossroads right now in the United States. I say, which path are we going to take? I think we still have a chance to take the path that I think is going to bring us together. Faith is not about expediency and like getting things fast and whenever I want them, but it's about knowing that the answer and the clarity and what needs to happen is going to happen when it's supposed to, and having faith and trust that will happen. So in all this in all this sort of challenge and pain and challenges we've seen, there's also a lot of positives and light that I think is being shown, that I think is going to be really helpful. So I think that could be me, is just really trying to recognize that when I see another human being, that I'd like to treat them well and with respect and kindness and compassion, and to know that, and knowing that if I don't do that, then I'm actually really, it's a reflection of me. And not really valuing myself and treating myself well at the same time. So that's really what I mean by that.
Thank you so much. I put that question in from the your second slide or something like that,
Okay.
but it said could be me.
Yeah.
And that had stayed with me the whole time. So I appreciate that. And I'm
Yeah.
apologizing. I'm getting ready for class right now as I'm cutting my little material.
Yeah, no, I
thank you for
yeah.
giving me inspiration for today's class and just for life. I appreciate it.
I'm appreciative of you being here right before class. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Gallardo, our next question comes from Shalera. She asks, when does one shift from being oppressed to being oppressor? Is that based on class movement, employment, education, or geographical location?
I think all that can certainly play a role. I mean, I think the reality is that we can be both at the same time, though. So I think, whether it's just class or, certainly I think the class status that I have now was not the class status that I grew up with and was raised in. And the education that I have now, certainly I didn't have, and my parents did not have. And, the employment opportunity, all that has certainly made a difference in terms of, afforded me more privileges. And I think, class in some ways, I always tell people that, racism does not affect all people of color in the same way. And when we talk about, white privilege, which comes up a lot in these conversations, I would say white privilege does also not benefit every white individual and white community member in the same way either. And so I think we have to really think about how we talk about these issues, but I think you can be both. So I think, certainly these certain sociocultural identities can impact how we experience the world, how we're impacted by the world. But I also think we regardless of some of those, we can still be both oppressor and oppressed at the same time, from one moment to another, from one day to another, from one situation to another. And I think that's where I think our intentionality, after the death of George Floyd, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote this wonderful op-ed in the LA Times. And basically he said that it's like, he was talking about racism, and he said, racism's always in the air. It's like the air that we breathe, essentially. So if we're not shedding light on it so we can see it, it's like dust particles in the air. We need to shed light on it, because when we do, we can see the dust particles better in some ways, right? He kind of gave that analogy. And so I think about, if we are not intentional about working against the isms of the world, then we might be passively participating in perpetuating those. And that goes for all of us, including me. So whatever the color of our skin is, if we are not intentional about working against the isms of the world, because it's in the air that we breathe. Aristotle said that we as humans are political animals. And one interpretation of that is that we cannot remove ourselves from the context in which we find ourselves. So to pretend that we're not being influenced by the world around us, the information that we get and the information that we don't get, it's naive of us in some ways. So we all have to be intentional about working against those isms in some ways, because otherwise we might be perpetuating those very things in our lives without even being aware of it. Social psychological research has said for decades now that the majority of human behavior is automatic and involuntary, which means that most of the time we're just responding and doing and behaving without even thinking about it oftentimes. So how can we stop and be more intentional and be more mindful about how we engage with, how we respond to, how we understand? Most of us are cognitively trying to consolidate information in the simplest, most efficient way possible. And when we do that, we might be missing some very important elements of a situation, of a person, of a circumstance. So I think we need to slow ourselves down, be intentional, be mindful. We're all breathing the air and we got to filter the air that we're breathing in better ways. So I think I don't know if I answered the question, but that just came up for me.
No, you did. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Sheila.
Appreciate
Thanks for
that.
your question, Sheila. Yeah.
Our next question in the chat is from Alejandra, and she asks, how can white individuals deconstruct their cultures and ideologies?
Yeah. So it's a good question. And, I think it's going to look differently for a lot of different people. But one thing I would say, Resmaa Menakem has this great book about racial trauma. It's called My Grandmother's Hands. And then it's got colon, and I forget the second half of it. But Resmaa Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands, he talks about that, trauma, and he's not the only one that talks about this, but he says the racial trauma that African-American Black communities experienced during the time of slavery in our country is stored in their bodies in many ways. That trauma is stored in our bodies. And he says that imagine, and he calls communities, white-bodied communities, white-bodied individuals, because he's sort of bringing to light this idea that everybody lost something, including white-bodied individuals, because imagine how many good, well-intentioned white-bodied individuals during that time who had to sort of figure out how to sustain, rationalize, justifies, give up something to see the dehumanization of another human being, even if they didn't agree with it. They had to figure out how to keep moving forward in those times. And so everybody has lost something when we talk about these issues around isms, and particularly around racism, including white community members as well. And so I think in some ways, somehow or another, I'll give you another example. At some point in our country, Italians and Irish individuals, there were signs that said no Irish, no Italians need apply in our country. And somehow or another, Italians and Irish just became white community members somehow. It just sort of happened. I know how that happened, but that happened over our history. And so I think everybody has lost something, and everybody's losing something in this process. And so I think, what does it, everybody has culture too. Like when we think about deconstructing, it's like not assuming that if you identify as a white-bodied individual, assuming you don't have culture is probably not accurate. Assuming you're not losing something when the isms of the world manifest themselves is probably not accurate in some ways. And so I think it's about also understanding their own culture and how they came to understand themselves in this particular way, what was lost, what it means to have lighter skin in the United States. I always tell people, look, I'm not ever trying to make people feel bad for who they are or what they have or where they come from. I'm just trying to help people realize, what does it mean to occupy the space that we do in the way that we do, and how that may or may not impact other people around us. And I think that is part of it. So I think one part of it is just understanding who they are culturally and what that has brought to them ideologically in some ways, what has been lost. There you go, Charlotte. Thank you. Yes, that's a great book, by the way. If you've not read that book, pick it up. But Resmaa Menakem talks a lot about that process in the book. And so I think that's one way to begin doing that, as just a brief response, because I know we're at 7 o'clock. So yeah. By the way, I want to acknowledge Sabrina Delgado, who's on the call. Sabrina is our, she recruits for our Aliento program, and is an amazing advocate and voice and liaison from the community out in the world to our program. And so we would not be where we are without Sabrina's hard work and efforts and dedication to help continue to bring students to the program. So thank you, Sabrina. Appreciate your help and work. So, yeah. I see one of our Aliento students, Judith, is also here as well. So hi, Judith. Yeah.
Dr. Gallardo, I would like to thank you so much. I know we are already in the edge of our time here. I would like to thank you so much for this powerful speech, for answering all the questions. I would like just to check before I pass it to you for any last comment, see if Dr. Gabby or Dr. Brame from the center would like to have a final word or say something else for us.
I would just, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Absolutely.
Just very briefly, just gratitude for this perspective. And I took notes from a lot of the screens that you showed. There's a lot to think about here. And there's perspectives here that I really hadn't considered. And I love this. I love getting my head turned around to see things in a different way. So I'm just very grateful and thank you. And it was beautifully and eloquently presented. So thank you. And it was so nice that you brought in your family and your daughters and your absolutely gorgeous mother. And
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate all of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for being open. And I wouldn't be here without my family. So they travel with me everywhere, even if they're not present.
I get it. I understand that.
Yeah. Gabby, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time and being part of our celebration and sharing your perspective. Really liked hearing what you had to say. And like Dr. Brame, I was taking notes and I'm like, ooh, I might want you to come and have a conversation with my students in leadership. Just overall, thank you so much for your participation and your willingness.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being here. I see some comments and I see Charlotta still educating us on different books. And so thank you, Charlotte. I appreciate it. Yeah, good one. Good one. Yeah, there's a lot of good references. So appreciate your time and for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Anytime I can be a resource, please let me know. Let me know. Happy to support any of you anytime. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Gallardo. And thank you everyone for being here today. It was really insightful and powerful conversation. I wish you all a very good night and see you in the next session, which is Friday, Dr. Gabby? Yeah, okay. So see you on
our
the
final session, our closing session is this coming Friday with Dr. Resendez, who's an outside member of our community, and she'll be coming and sharing her story as well. So I invite you all to join us for the very last day of our celebration as we close out Latino Heritage Month.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Thank you.